We're hot. Hey, welcome. I'm Brian Watson. If you're here for whatever vision, focus, and simplicity is, you're in the right spot. I'm actually here to talk about MVPs. So, a little subterfuge by the committee by calling it that. What's that?
LeBron James.
Yes. I'm not a stage guy, so I'm going to walk around. Hopefully that doesn't freak any of you out. There's a lot of obstacles, and as you can see, I'm not as svelte as I used to be, so I don't want to block the projector for you. So as I mentioned, we are here to talk about MVPs. Wendy, what's an MVP?
Me.
Very, very subtle flowers. Very subtle. Two cool definitions, and I don't care what you call that. You could go with the minimum marketable feature type, but MMF doesn't seem to roll off the tongue as well as MVP. But both have a very similar definition. Basically, let's put together something with just the features that we need and nothing more. And the reason I'm doing this talk today, it's actually come out of a lot of conversations with customers where, I'll just be blunt, they're doing it wrong. And you talk to teams, and they're like, hey, management came down and said we have to deliver this thing by April 1st. You dealing with that, John, still? Just get it done. Or my favorite, what's that?
Changing that.
Insert random bank here, because I think every bank does it. Do we have any bank people?
Yeah.
Do you have to build everything in your backlog?
Everything, yeah.
Everything. That's not Agile. We don't build everything in the backlog. So I spent a lot of time working with product owners, working with businesses, working with people with V and P in their title to try to get them to understand these two, whichever direction you want to go. So I can't see your name tag, who yelled out LeBron here earlier. Bill. It's actually Frank Robinson who wrote that. But if you're going to Google Frank Robinson MVP, make sure you throw software development in there, or you get the baseball player. And I've had angry emails after a session about, hey, I Googled Frank Robinson. That's crap. That guy doesn't exist. He's a baseball player. No, there's really a guy. You can Google that and look. So the reason why they changed my title to the vision, simplicity, and focus is that's a lot of what I preach about the ingredients for an MVP. How many of you, if we pinned you down out here in the middle, could within 30 seconds or less tell me what the vision of your project is? Could you do it? Could you do it? One, Chuck, you can't. What's the vision of your project?
To integrate the project management and financial systems for the department within the client.
Okay. That's pretty big. A few epics going on there. What's that? Keep it simple, stupid. Simplicity. We're going to talk about some examples of simplicity. We're going to show you some examples of simplicity. And then a laser focus on the user. Because this is not a workshop setup. I've changed it a little bit. We're not going to do story mapping from that perspective. We're going to talk about specification fails. So if you like bad birthday cakes, you're going to love the slides that are coming up pretty soon. So let's talk about vision. Probably the number one thing that I get at customers, and I was dealing with a potential client last week. Hey, we need you to come do some product owner training. Cool, I can put a 2 or 3 day class together. Where do you want to go? And they're like, yeah, we could get maybe 2 hours with them. We can't take them away for more than 2 hours. How are we going to build software if the business isn't there working with us? It's just not going to work. I think we're outnumbered, guys. But guys, how many of you have had your wife bring home that paint chip from Lowe's? Paint the bedroom, paint the bathroom, and you do it. And then she walks in and goes, I don't like that. Because she waited till you were done. Now, there's a few people here who know my wife. She's the opposite. She'll paint like 37 swatches of colors, and I have to live with that for 6 months of like this multicolored wall. But that's very similar to product owners not being, you guys are shaking your head because you know it's true. Product owners not providing a solid vision. And this isn't a new thing. I've got a couple videos that we're going to watch And I want you to listen for the vision, but I also, in the second video, want you to listen to how the vision has matured. That is okay as well. When we first start something, oh, I just kicked somebody's Coke. What are they left? Not mine. Didn't do it. So I want you to listen. The first video is pretty short. It's only like 15, oops, I guess I stuck this one in here first. Sorry. Big picture. Who are we doing it for? Why are we doing it? All those same things that we just talked about. Keep it simple. Focus on your user. So let's listen to this first video. It's like 18 seconds.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space.
Allison, what is the vision?
Sorry. The vision?
Yeah, what's the vision?
Expand our women's space.
Go to space. There's actually a much more finite one. Who heard the vision? What's the vision in there?
Bring
Yeah, it's kind of an important part. Land him on the moon, bring him back safely. We got him halfway there. Mission accomplished. Sort of a thing. So about a year later, President Kennedy gave another speech. Now, this speech is at Rice University down in Houston, and there was a problem. Congress gave him the money he was asking for to fly to the moon and get somebody back safely. But for reference, this speech was given about 16 or 17 years after we dropped the bomb. And a lot of engineers were refusing to come work for the space program because a lot of engineers that worked on the Manhattan Project said that they had been lied to. They did not know they were building a weapon. So people didn't want to come to the space program. You're going to hear those themes. You're going to hear the vision expand. He's going to make a comment about Rice playing Texas. That's because he's at Rice University to play up to the crowd. If I was that lame, I'd say OH. Right? And also in this video, are you not going to work? Come on. All right, apparently I've got to go actually hit it. Pay attention to the guys who are melting behind President Kennedy in the heat and smoking giant cigars.
Now look into space, to the moon, and to the planets beyond. And we have vowed that we shall not see it governed by a hostile flag of conquest, but by a banner of freedom and peace. We have vowed that we shall not see space filled with weapons of mass destruction, but with instruments of knowledge and understanding. Yet the vows of this nation can only be fulfilled if we in this nation are first, and therefore we intend to be first. In short, our leadership in science and industry, our hopes for peace and security, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men, and to become the world's leading spacefaring nation. We set sail on this new sea because there is new knowledge to be gained and new rights to be won, and they must be won and used for the progress of all people. For space science, like nuclear science and all technology, has no conscience of its own. Whether it will become a force for good or ill depends on man. And only if the United States occupies a position of preeminence can we help decide whether this new ocean will be a sea of peace or a new terrifying theater of war. I do not say that we should or will go unprotected against the hostile misuse of space any more than we go unprotected against the hostile use of land or sea. But I do say that space can be explored and mastered without feeding the fires of war, without repeating the mistakes that man has made in extending his writ around this globe of ours. There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
So much to unpack there. It's going to be peaceful. We're going to be first. He's appealing to the egos of the engineers. Why do you want to come here? Because it's hard. You could stay where you are and it's going to be easy, or you can come do this because it's hard. And actually, the recruitment and job applications at NASA went up like 1,000% after this speech. They couldn't get people, and then all of a sudden, everybody wanted to work at NASA. But there was a very clear vision of what we were trying to accomplish. And in a completely different talk, we could go through the space program, all the different flights, and talk about essentially how every trip into space was its own MVP. We were trying to solve a particular problem, and one of the flights would do that, and then the next one would tackle the next problem. If we tried to fly to the moon right from the start, we would have failed spectacularly. We actually didn't have the technology to do it right from the start. But there's some psychology behind this vision piece as well that's super important. How many college graduates do I have in here? And if you're not, don't worry about it. There's a very specific question that you don't have to deal with that the rest of us do. So what's your name?
Jeremy.
Jeremy, where'd you graduate from?
I graduated from Belmont in Tennessee.
From Belmont in Tennessee. How many times a year do your friends at Belmont call you and say, Jeremy, we noticed you haven't sent us a check recently. Can you help us out? How many times do you get that?
At least once a month.
At least once a month? Wow, they're aggressive. At least at Purdue, it's like quarterly. Although they do hound you with emails. Where did you go?
I went to University of Phoenix.
Phoenix? Do you get those calls from them?
Oh, yeah.
Hey, the endowment needs some help.
Every 6 months.
Every 6 months? Well, that's good. It's better than monthly. Don't go to Belmont. Those guys are like debt collectors. You owe us money. So Adam Grant at Pennsylvania University. And I was hoping Bart, did Bart sneak in? I did this for Bart. So if you guys see Bart later, you can tell him I put a Penn U thing in here. He did a study with these poor souls in the call centers trying to make minimum wage in college, calling Penn U grads, actually soliciting money for scholarships. And he broke these individuals into 3 groups. The first group of people read success stories of former call center reps. So I used to work in the call center, and now I have this killer job, and if I hadn't worked in the call center, then I wouldn't be as good as I am. The second group of people read success stories of former students who received the scholarships they were soliciting money for. And then the third group read People magazine or Playboy or whatever people read before they work on the phones in college. So what do you think happened? Bueller.
The people who read the success stories were more aggressive, did better, and got more contributions.
I don't know about the aggressive part, but yes, they did better. They got more contributions to the tune of twice the money as the other 2 groups combined. Because they had the vision. They understood what they were doing. Here's the reason why we're doing this. It's not just to collect money for some scholarships, whatever. But now they had a tangible connection. Vision is so important to the kickoff of a project, especially if we're trying to put an MVP together. It's indispensable. And a lot of the time that I spend with companies is trying to get them to articulate that vision. Second thing is simplicity. So I'm required by law to give you part of the Agile Manifesto during a talk at an Agile conference. So there's my legally mandated line from the Agile Manifesto. The art of maximizing what's not done is essential. But much like vision, this isn't a new concept. There's this guy back a few hundred years ago, Leonardo da Vinci, had a very similar statement. Simplicity is the ultimate in sophistication. But let's go back to the space program for a second. The Russians and the Americans had a conundrum in space: how to take notes. How did the Americans solve the problem?
They created a pen that would work in zero gravity. They spent a ton of money.
It was pressurized.
Oh, yeah.
Cost a lot of money, and it worked. What did the Russians do?
They took pencils.
They took pencils. Think about that. We're going to take I think it took like 2.5 years to develop the pen. God knows how much money, because it's a government contract, even though it's lowest bidder. And the Russians are like, oh, we got this pencil to sharpen it, right? Let's look at a more modern example. What is this? Google. What's Google do? Everything. What's its primary purpose, Flowers? Searching for things.
Advertising.
Advertising for sure.
Well, the government would ask them how they make money using it.
But it's-
Letting people use
Their primary function is the search for things on the internet. Once upon a time, Yahoo had the same vision, we'll say. But when your vision gets corrupted, you end up with this. I don't even know what all of this is. I remember when I took this screenshot 4 or 5 years ago, it did take me like 19 seconds to figure out where to search for something, right? Simplicity. And I grant you, it's not going to be an easy conversation to sit in a CEO's office of a company and say, I got this great idea. Our screen is going to be white and just have the logo in a box, and that's it. Because there's another psychological phenomenon. As humans, we want to overcomplicate things. Guys, again, how many times has your wife asked you to paint that half bath and ignore the chuckling section over here of people who know my wife? You're like, oh, I got this can of mist tint paint. It's going to be a 3-hour job. I'm going to paint this half bath. And then all of a sudden, you're buying a new mirror, and new switch plates, and new fixtures, and no, we didn't change the sink. Pretty much everything else but the sink and the toilet got changed in that bathroom, right? Because it's hard for us as humans to try to keep things simple. We have to fight against it every day. Who knows what the definition of Occam's razor is? There's got to be one nerd in here who studied this in college.
All things being equal, the simplest explanation is the right one.
Yes, all things being equal, the simplest explanation is probably the right one. Think about our friends in NASA. All things being equal, wouldn't a pencil have been much easier to solve?
On the side, that's math. The graphite flakes off, it causes problems.
Does it?
Yeah.
Don't ruin the story.
I gotta work with you today.
Facts. Don't let facts get in the way of my stories. I had the whole crowd in the palm of my hand and you just ruined it. I'll remember this.
When the legend becomes fact, print the legend.
Exactly. But think about that. You're building a greenfield solution, or you're being brought in to start something from scratch. Part of why I was bringing it back to the pencil, right, is let's think about vision. If the vision had been, we just need to take notes in outer space, you smart guys figure something out, would the solution have been much different than what I imagine is the product owner came in and said, we need a pen that works in space, right? Completely different context to the solution. It's hard to break these things down to the smallest individual pieces. What's the simplest solution? Do we have any people who fly regularly in here? Do you use Delta, ma'am?
Yeah, sometimes. I get taxed.
Did you? Oh, now you show up. You missed the Penn University slide, by the way. I put that in there for you,
My bad.
and you weren't here. Did you use the first edition of the Delta app?
No.
When it came out? No? Did you? Were you a Delta guy? Did anybody use the first edition of the Delta app? It's probably like 5 years ago. It was horrible. You put in your flight number, and it told you if your next flight was on time. If I told you that today, hey, download this cool app, here's what it does, you'd probably look at me all cross-eyed. But think about from a minimum viable product perspective. We want to get people to using our app. And what is the fastest piece of valuable information we could provide people? And we're going to come back to the people part, because they weren't marketing that to everybody. Airplane apps are designed for one group of people and one group of people only. That's frequent flyers. And they're tailored for that. But all things being equal, instead of you having to get off the plane and look at the board to see where your gate and if you're on time, do it from your phone after we land. Pareto principle. Who are my PMPs in here? You, ma'am, in the back. What's the Pareto principle?
Sorry, I don't remember. I'm in Agile right now.
It still applies. Yeah.
20% of the work creates 80% of the value.
Yes, 20% of the work will create 80% of your value. We have some product owners in here. The reason why the MVP is so important is because of the lack of waste. You get that 20% done, so much value comes through. Then you can take a step back and evaluate, do we need to do the rest of this stuff? 80% of the effort is going to come from trying to get 20% of the features? That's crazy. This is an old stat, but it hasn't changed much. Actually, before I left my most recent job, I meant to access the Gartner and the CHAOSS reports that we have, and I totally forgot to see how it's changed. But it's been in that 35 to 45% ballpark. From a code maintenance perspective, from a testing perspective, from a development perspective, from my project managers clubbing me over the head with a baseball bat. And if you want to see what that bat looks like, go to Chuck's talk tomorrow. I've seen a preview of his presentation. He's got a picture of that bat in his presentation. Think of all the headache you deal with. And if you could have skipped 45% of that, life would be so much easier. The rest of the things are just edge cases. Something that may happen once every 5 years. For those of you who work at the bank, who are those guys again and gals? You know those things. Hey, 10 years ago, the data center went out and we lost power. We couldn't look at accounts for 30 seconds. So we're going to spend $50 million to make sure that never happens. I heard somebody chuckle over here. That's a real life scenario. 20 years ago when I worked at Bank One in Indiana. Our main data center, our redundant data center went down at the same time. Tellers couldn't process transactions for 90 seconds. We spent $35 million to make sure that never happened again.
If it was 90 minutes, I'd be more concerned.
90 seconds. Because we can't have that. Simplest solution, I'm like, can't we just tell the tellers to stall? Write things down on pieces of paper? There's got to be an easier way than spending that money. So this is another reason where MVPs come into play. What's the minimum set of things that we have to take to the market where people are going to find value? The magic triangle. Wants, likes, and needs. We have to be laser focused only on the needs. The things that kill us are the wants or the likes. Hey, wouldn't it be cool if? How many people have heard that in a meeting? I know Chuck has, because we've had that conversation. Wouldn't it be fun if it did this? Yeah, it would be fun, but please stop. I've had to yell at my own people where they bring that. I'm like, what are you doing? You're killing us. The product owners are worse. I don't need one of my BAs doing that. So how can we get around that? The user. Focusing on the user. Who's using our product? If you try to make everyone happy, how many people do you make happy? Nobody. So what are the attributes of the group that we're going for? If I'm Delta Airlines and I'm putting an app together, I'm going to focus on frequent flyers, not on families who fly one time a year. They're not going to find value or impact from what I'm doing. So what are the attributes of a frequent flyer? What are the characteristics of a frequent flyer? What are their intended actions? Those are the things that I'm going to focus on. At my previous company, Delta actually became one of our customers, and I got to work with the group that develops the app. And there's a cool function now in the app where I can actually go book a flight. So I could search right now in front of you, Columbus to wherever, book a flight. The product owners of the app were actually bemoaning the fact that they were looking at usage statistics. And while that feature of searching for a flight was one of the most used actions, like the second highest used activity in the app, booking a flight was actually the lowest thing.
Yep.
Does anybody know why? Why?
They're just seeing if they go standby. They're seeing if the flight gets delayed, what the options are, and then they'll call somebody to actually go change the flight.
That's exactly it. Because I do it 20 times a year myself. Oh, my flight's delayed? How many options do I have from here to there? And then I call the platinum line, hey, put me on this flight. And it never occurred to them that that was the usage people were doing. Because they were getting ready to whack the feature, and I'm like, oh God, please don't. Don't do that. You'll have rebellion on your hands. But if we're trying to narrow down what is minimum viable product, you have to start with your user as well. Which user group are we going to target, and what are the features that they need? So to do a play on the manifesto, where we have to work is on user interactions over requirements and specifications. So things like models, stories, conversations, to give us those intended user actions, those characteristics, those attributes, those are what we need. Specifications suck. They don't help us. And here's why. Here are some specification fails. What's the most important day in most people's lives? Every year.
My birthday.
Or birthday month for Ms. Flowers. Your birthday. So can you imagine if you went to go have your happy birthday cookie done, and you give them these specifications, please have it read, happy birthday, Heather and Susan, make Susan bigger. And this is what you get. Specifications gone wrong. How about this one? Make sure happy birthday's on both. You can hear people calling in the instructions, the giant eagle. Poor Dylan, his big 5th birthday. Hopefully he can't read and know it's messed up, but you know mom's pissed. You know mom, you can hear mom all the way in the cheese aisle yelling at the bakery for this one. Where are my QA people? Where am I? Right. Can we test pretty font?
What's a font?
What's a font? Love this one. Olympic rings, for those of you who might not be able to read that. I want the Olympic rings on my cake. And then my favorite. Now, you guys are going to have to take a second and read through this last one because it is the most epic specification fail ever. But one could argue they did the right thing. While those look like donkeys, and I have no idea what that is, that, I'm guessing, is a goblin, and there is, in fact, booze on the cake. And I'm not sure how goats and goblins and booze all work together for Halloween. Ghosts. Was it ghosts? Oh. Shit, I didn't even get that. That's an even bigger. But I could see goats for Halloween, right? Like, I don't know, pentagrams and goats and stuff. All right. And I'm going to prove to you specifications fail. So get out a writing utensil. If you visited the Sketch Dev booth earlier, get out your sketchbook. Shameless plug. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. I want you to draw me a picture. If you have done this before, and there's a few in the room I've seen who've been through this exercise, I know you've been through it, you can sit this one out and mentally contemplate how long 3 minutes is when you're just sitting and waiting for people to draw a picture. But I want you to draw me a picture. Something that has a gasoline engine, that has 4 wheels, a rubber tire mounted to each wheel, and the product shall have a steel body. So draw me a picture. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. You may begin. All right, pencils down. How many of you drew push lawnmowers? Well, you're wrong. But there's something weird. I've done this exercise about 2,000 times. The most drawn thing is a push lawnmower.
No way.
It is. How many people drew like a box with 4 wheels and an engine? Right? Why were you way so literal? Why'd you do that? This is why specifications are terrible. And you can look at this and see this is what we give developers on a regular basis. The product shall do this, the product shall do that. John gets it and he tries to make heads or tails and does voodoo and throws chicken bones and tries to infer. Who's the user of this product? You don't know. What are they trying to do with this product? You don't know. This is why specifications suck, and we need to focus on the user. So what if I told you I'm a homeowner, and I have a large corner lot, and I want something that's going to let me mow my lawn and be comfortable while using it?
That sounds like a writing novel.
That's when I would draw it.
That is not a bus. Kevin, have you done this before?
I don't think so.
Because it looked like you drew a tractor, but it looked like you drew a John Deere, maybe not so much like that. More of you probably would have drawn. Did anybody draw this? Did anyone? You didn't know the goal. Actually, I've had less than 10 people ever draw that, even though push mowers are the most popular one. And ironically, I did a session like this at Kansas State University a few years ago, and 3 out of the 20 people in class drew that. So it depends where you live, I guess, to think about that. But you wasted 3 minutes of your lives drawing a picture based on my specifications, when had you just known this, it would have been much better. Focusing on the user, focusing on the interaction is going to help us drive out that MVP. Here's a common conversation that I have with companies, and you may see yourself in the mirror as I'm going through it. The default corporate reflex for everything is documentation. And then you have the question, well, why do you have to write a 300-page requirement document? My favorite. John, can you write software without a requirement document?
Yeah, I know what to do.
Yeah, you don't need this. My second favorite line, how will we ever have a record of the system? What's the most accurate record of a system? The system. When people tell me this, what are they really saying? Anyone? Guess. Trust. It's essentially. I want CYA. I want to be able to blame somebody else. I wrote it up. They just didn't listen to me. I got called a few years ago. So I just recently changed jobs. I worked for 6 years with version 1. And probably 4 or 5 years ago, I got a call from a company. And I'd done some work for them previously. And the call came in, they're like, our business analysts suck. And we need you to come fix them. Okay. So go rolling out to rural Pennsylvania to meet with these guys. And they had just spent $250,000 or more with McKinsey or one of those companies to put together their new software development lifecycle. We have our new process. And the very first project of the process, oddly enough, failed. So I'm in there doing my thing, being the consultant, asking good questions. And the first thing they tried out is this 300-page requirement document. And they can't figure out why it failed because they had this 300-page requirement document. Ergo, the business analysts must suck. So I started doing a little bit of research. And I asked the BA how much time she spent. Her estimate was she probably spent about 3 hours per page. The executives were pissed because in the new process, they have to be available. And they spent 2 weeks locked in a room talking about requirements. And then they have their toadies that came along with them. And then I met the PM. She was a piece of work. Are you done yet? Are you done yet? Are you done yet? I'm like, I just got here. What am I done with? She's asking me if I'm done yet. And then we had other people who reviewed this document. And my best guess, based on the average rate of the people, was that's how much that document cost. And the CIO wanted to know how I could make things better. And by the time I was supposed to leave, after 4 days of consulting, I was supposed to have a brilliant idea of how to fix things. And as most of us usually do, I had a bright idea that came to me in the shower the morning of the last day. And I walked into the CIO's office and I said, I figured it out. Your next project will be perfect. I will write the requirement document and it won't fail. And he's like, awesome, what's that gonna cost me? And I said, the low, low price of $250 a page. And being a Philadelphian, he used some rather colorful language and wove that in a way I've never actually heard terms used before. The reality is, if you do that math and you divide the hours by the dollar amount, he already spent $250 a page. He had no concept of what he was spending on these things. But if you read that document, I couldn't even tell you who was supposed to use it, what group it was supposed to be for. It was literally 300 pages of, this will do this, it won't do that, here's a business rule, here's a straight table of shit you're supposed to figure out in a matrix. It was insane. Output does not equal outcomes. Just because you have a checkbox for I need a requirement document doesn't help you build better software. And you end up building everything in the backlog, or you get told this has to be done by April 1st and you don't know what it is. So here's an exercise. You guys can steal this. I think they're going to put the slides out. Is there any COHAA person in here? Do you guys put the slides out? We'll assume they do. They usually do. I've done this 100 times with executives. to try to explain minimum viable product. So let's take a look at a couple scenarios. You guys just got a bonus. It's May 1st, you just got a bonus. You have this big, fat stack of cash sitting in your bank account. You've been waiting for this bonus to come through because you want to go buy a new car. Not because you need a new car, you want a new car. You want a new toy. And you could have any of these 3 vehicles. You can go write cash. You can go to CarMax today. You can write a check. So you can go get the classic 76 AMC Pacer with the 8-track. May or may not have heat. It does not have air conditioning, I can tell you that. Bubble top. We're in Ohio, so you can go get the lame, safe Accord, built just down the road. And if we have any people from Honda in here, I'm not saying Hondas are lame, but would you rather have an Accord or would you go get a pimp new Corvette? Remember, you can write a check for any of these because you want a new toy. How many people are getting the Pacer? See, I thought you'd be the one guy. There's usually one guy in the crowd. I was wrong. There's usually one guy.
Close, but not Pacer.
Nope, Pacer. You can't get the Gremlin. How many people are getting the Accord? Liars. How many people are going to get the Vet? You don't need the car. It's a toy. You're going to tool around. Right? But let's change the scenario. You don't have the bonus, but you work at Huntington, and they have the thing where your paycheck comes in and automatically moves stuff to savings, right? So you don't actually see it go away. It just does it for you. And you do the research, and even though you still don't need the car, you want a new toy. You've been itching, you're in that midlife crisis. I need that car, that extra car. You find if you save for 2 months, you can go get the Pacer. If you save for 6 months, you can get the Accord. And a year from now, for Path to Agility, you can roll up in the Tesla with the gull-wing doors. Has this changed anybody's mind? If you were buying the Accord earlier, have you changed your mind? Are you going to buy the Tesla now? For those of you who were buying the Corvette earlier, are you changing your mind? Are you buying the Accord now? Nobody's changing their minds. Okay. Here's reality, right? Here's what your product owners are going through. In their mind, they're in situation 1. I just went in front of the governance board. They just approved $1 million for my new project. I got this fat stack of cash. I need the Lamborghini. I need the Corvette. In reality, they don't have that. They're walking 5 miles to work right now. That's why you're undertaking a new project, right? They don't have that functionality. They need it. So if they're walking 5 miles to work each day, and they could trade any car in with 0 wait time and get the value for it, now which way are you going to go? How many people now are going to buy the Pacer? Right? Because even if it doesn't have heat, what's that?
Because it's for the company.
Yeah. Well, it's a conversation piece. But it's got an engine, 4 wheels, and a cover, and I won't be walking out in the rain. And then in 6 months, I can upgrade to the Accord. That's pretty sweet. And then if we want to stick through it, we can go get the Lambo. But it might take us a year to get there. Too many product owners want to focus on this instead of what can we do here? And in actuality, a really good question that you can ask them is what if in a month I could get you a bicycle? You're still exposed to the elements, but now you're at least moving faster. Well, of course, after doing this one talk, I had somebody come up and say, this is great, it's not real life, it'll never work back at my shop. And I'm like, okay, I could do this with the Delta app, but more people understand the iPhone. iPhone 1, look at the specs on that sweet bastard. 5 ounces, a massive 128 mega RAM. The biggest size was 16 gig, 3.5-inch screen, a 2 megapixel camera. That thing was a beast. But it was first. it had the first touchscreen. This is the 6. It was actually the first model to go back up in weight. The 5, I think, was 4.2 or 3 ounces. So this is the first one to jump back up. But now the minimum is a gig of RAM. The smallest is a 16. The biggest is 128 gig of storage. The screen is over an inch bigger. But they had to evolve to this. They had to get there. But why am I using this example? Why is it important to get your MVP out and be the first one? Because that first model sold 6.1 million units. That's 6.1 million customers they had before anybody else. And when the 6 came out, it sold 10 million units in the first weekend. There's no other business in the world selling 10 million units in a 2-day period. Except maybe movie theaters when big movies come out. And that might be debatable because it's not one movie theater that's doing it. So if we go back to our cars, what's our iPhone 1? The Pacer. And we can evolve, and whatever comes after the X or the 10 or however I'm supposed to pronounce that. Are we going Super Bowl now? Is the next one XI? We can evolve. I have customers I worked with 5 years ago come back and talk about my new managers not understanding the iPhone 1 comparison. Can we have that talk again with them? Take these slides, go have the talk with your product owners. What if we tried to build the iPhone from the start? What would we end up with? What's that?
Canceled project.
A canceled project. What should have been a canceled project, but it wasn't. The Galaxy Note. Pretty close. I'm not doing this to bag on Microsoft phones. I have friends who work for Microsoft who tell me how awesome they are. But I have 6 years, 7 years of apps on my phone. It syncs to my MacBook, which syncs to my iPad, which all syncs back to my iCloud. And it's all together. It would have to take something catastrophic to get me to change. And this might be better, but is the value high enough to get me to change? Probably not. You know, they say you only get one chance to make a first impression. So you want your MVP to be right. But there's only one company that's first to the market space. How many people have heard of SAFe? How many people like SAFe? Are there other scaling things out there that could be better? Maybe. There's some that seem more logical. Are they going to get any traction? Dean was the first one, and he had a pretty picture. Never underestimate the power of a pretty picture. And Dean had it. But if you're like, oh, that's not a good enough example for me. What if we don't have an MVP? What do we end up with? John's worked with me. Wendy's worked with me. Lisa's worked with me. The other John's worked with me. I always had a very firm rule. Your first job was to stay out of the newspapers. And please, for the love of God, don't have to go testify in front of Congress. We're a few years away from it now, so you can go back and read the testimony. But it's painful. It's every project we ever worked. The product owners are in a different building from the developers. Requirements were changing 2 weeks before go live. The 6 months of testing time got 2 weeks. So we're testing in the last 2 weeks a massive application and changing requirements within the last 10 days. It's everything, every nightmare, but it's also something every single person. Like, you could go write the story about healthcare.gov and just take the label off it, and it's half the stuff we've all worked on. It's why MVPs are so important. What user group are we trying to get to? How can we keep it simple? And what's the vision of what we're trying to accomplish? Let's be first. Let's be good. And then we can go back and conquer the world. We can get to the Lambo. But we might need to be the pacer for a little while. Question?
So the other argument is delight the customer. The minimum viable product delights the customer.
Mm-hmm.
But the Pinto or Pacer is not going to delight the customer.
If you're walking 5 miles in the rain and snow, what's today? May what? Legitimately 30 days ago, it was still snowing, right? I think we got snow on the 20th, somewhere in there. 1 month, I know it's been 80 degrees ever since that day, so it's a little hard to remember that it was snowing a month ago. But if they're doing the equivalent of walking uphill, that can be quite the delight. I mean, we worked on a project, I don't know if I'm allowed to say who they are. Wendy and I were at a place years ago, and they had a really long process to get something approved, which started with, was that a Word 97 doc? Like a version of Word that doesn't work on 2/3 of the machines anymore. Like that started with a Word doc that the end user had to fill out and mail in to have it reviewed, where they would take a red pencil and make changes and then mail it back to you. And this would go on for months until your application was even correct to enter the process. And legitimately, to get to the Lambo or the Corvette, probably going to be 2 years. But we have this painful chunk of work that takes 6-7 months of back and forth through snail mail. We can stand up a web form with data validation, save it to a database, and we can get that done in 2 months. That's a pretty attractive thing. Delight's all relative, right? Like, that's the trap the product owner is. Nobody will buy our thing unless it's a Corvette. If that was true, everybody would be driving Corvettes. And don't go to London, because everybody in London's driving Lamborghinis right now, because the euro tanked and the pound didn't. So everybody in the UK is buying on the European Lambos. It's crazy. You walk around London, there's like every third guy is driving a Lambo. But don't fall into the trap. All right, so we've hit the Q&A portion of the time. That's me. You can track me down. How much time do we have left? Anybody? 157? That can't be. Am I a half hour short? Did I? Or am I a half hour over? Oh, okay. Okay. There's no fluff in this. Well, the cakes were kind of fluffy. But they were funny, though. And I learned something new. It's ghosts and not goats. I totally thought that would be goats.
I was wondering why skeleton. That makes so much more sense now.
It does. And booze. I'm like, oh my God. Booze.
Seriously?
Yes, because of your poo bags. I mean boo bags. What's your question?
So what do you do with the industry who are FDA regulated, who are regulated by federal highway, who for auditors have to have that requirement information?
So we can still gather illicit and document requirements. We don't have to do it in a 300-page document that says the system shall, the system will, the system won't. It could be a story. It could be a drawing. It could be a model. You could put text around those models. My biggest thing I always tell people also is to go work with the auditors, right? The auditors are the boogeyman in the process. Everybody's afraid of the auditors. But when you ask half of the people, when was the last time you talked to an auditor? Never. Or years ago. And it's a really enlightening conversation. Hey, what do you need? And I've had more than one conversation with an auditor, and they've never heard of Agile before. And they go, wait. So you have this thing called a feature, and you're going to break that into these things called stories. And these stories are going to have acceptance criteria? Well, that's all I need. Because I can follow from what you're trying to deliver to the individual components to the acceptance criteria, which is a requirement in most places. And I get it, but most places, that's why I said the prevailing opinion, the default stance is we need documentation. It's because people are afraid to ask why, or what if we do something different. Sometimes you just have to ask for forgiveness. Let's go do it. What other questions do we have? There's got to be more questions.
So often, I work at Honda, and often we do large projects. Want to get it out. So I buy the choice.
I buy nothing but Hondas, but I buy pilots, not the Accords.
So our IT lately is more and more large projects where kind of a subcontract out and getting the outside company coming in. Now this is the Agile. In the old way, we write the same thing as you're saying.
Yeah.
100-page documentation, get the product owner of the business lead to sign that, and says, if you sign in the blood, then we're going to deliver this.
Yeah.
And nobody happy. Now, the new way, when we get the outside company come in to work with us, what would be your suggestion on how to do that contract incentive and in light of this MAP?
No different. Do stories with acceptance criteria. You can certainly go to any, and I would say, I know Chuck works at so you guys can you work at a software company, John. If a company came to us and said, here's 20 stories with acceptance criteria, would you guys build this? We would probably run around behind the doors going, is this for real? Are we dreaming? Did this actually happen? And then gladly build that for you. Because it's a much more definitive view. We're going to have more conversations. We're going to want to meet with everybody. We're going to want to have those conversations about the stories. But it's a hell of a lot easier for us to contract and build from that than here's a 100-page document of some random information, and now we got to parse through what you're trying to accomplish. Agile contracting is not that hard. You just got to want to do it different. It's the same with accounting, right? Most of the places, I'm sure some of you are like, oh, he just brought up accounting. Project-based accounting doesn't work for Agile. And largely it doesn't work if you're viewing it, we're just going to build an MVP, right? Hey, just fund this, and then we'll figure the next thing out. And accountants start twitching and short-circuiting. They don't know how to handle that. But you just have to work through. Show them value. What else? Oh, you got a question. Way up there.
Yeah, I did. In terms of working as the VA, working side by side with the developer, writing stories as they go, right? Versus having the VA write the stories and the requirements and having the developer then be able to estimate it and do the story points, etc. All I've seen that works successfully is the latter. Are you a proponent of either?
Ms. Flowers.
The number one rule of estimates is, John,
They're all wrong.
they're always wrong. Your estimates will always be wrong. I've been in project management. I'm not telling you how long because I like to use my young persona.
Her project management can drink. No? Drive? Vote?
Let's go the right direction.
Anyway, when you do that though, you're not getting the value and you're going to spend way more money. So if you have, and a lot of times what I've seen is that your VAs are writing just the user story. Why are they writing a requirement and a user story would be my question.
Well, there's the acceptance test criteria.
But that's the acceptance criteria. That's not the requirement. A requirement to me is something like an SRS or a system requirement specification that is that 300-page document. If you're just writing a user story with the acceptance criteria, then you have your requirement right there. The shall statements aren't getting us anywhere anymore, and they truly need to go away.
I think the question, though, was, would I advocate the BAs and developers working together on the stories, or the BAs go off with the product owners, write the stories and acceptance criteria, and then come back and throw it at the developers? Is that something collaboration, right? Isn't there a business people and developers? I'm not trying to be flip, but there's a reason for that. And it kind of goes back to the pencil and the pen story, right? Because I've worked in a lot of situations where I've had a business owner, hey, we need blah, blah, blah. And I have a developer in the room and they're like, hey, this other system does like 60% of that. Is that good enough? And it's just a lack of knowledge. And if you don't have that voice in the room as you're working through it, then you're duplicating work, or you're potentially missing some really awesome things. And the biggest fallacy is that, oh, if the developers aren't chained to the desk pressing keys 8 hours a day, they're not productive, right? And it's hocus pocus. I would much rather my entire team, BAs, devs, QAs, full contact working with the business to build what they need than some sort of artificial silo of, John, you just code. I hired you to code, right? Because he's going to be in the same boat in that second model as he is with a requirement document, except now he's just getting stories with some acceptance criteria and still trying to parse through what are they trying to accomplish.
Brian, can I add to that too? So
No. Go on.
So I am a VA, and so one of the things that I do is I always invite QA and dev to any elicitation meeting that I have, so that they can listen and they can hear what the product owner is talking about, what they really want, and they can ask questions at the time that might influence design or that might influence the way that they technically see something. And so in a sense, they are working with me to write the story. They understand everything right up front instead of me having to explain it to them at a later time during a Three Amigos or some other sort of a meeting. So I absolutely agree that Dev, QA, and BA all work together at the same time. And essentially writing the story. I mean, obviously I do all that work, but they come and they participate, and it's a much more productive, and there's a lot less churn.
Here's something you could do too. Instead of calling them stories, call them challenges or opportunities. What are you trying to solve? And then give it to the smart people to come bring ideas back to you. I get words mean things. Some people freak out when I say challenges because they think there's a negative connotation there. So some prefer opportunities. But change the word story. Do not change it to issue. We're not JIRA. Don't do that. But change the context of it. What's your opportunity, or what's your challenge, or what's the problem you're facing? Document that and then give it to us to fix. And we'll come back with some ideas. Chuck?
I think a good important part of that discussion, telling developers there, if there's a context within that discussion, that you might be talking about something else that's tangentially related, and by just looking at a straight story without setting that context, you might miss site requirements or, not to say edge cases, but other criteria that might help you design the software better.
Yeah.
Plus the developer getting there, they own the requirements too. So they can't just say, I wasn't involved in this.
Right. Ownership. Something about collective code ownership. I don't know what that is.
Well, we do have the BAs side by side with the developers,
Yeah.
but the BAs were not fast enough in developing the stories, right? In other words, they needed some lead time to talk to the product owner, to figure things out, and the developers were just doing this while, that was being done.
Yeah.
But so in my experience though, I always had a tech lead with me. Even during elicitation, so it was usually myself, I was a PM, I would take the BA and the tech lead with me, and it helped just even during that elicitation of writing that story, and then the tech leads a lot of times would help me write the stories. And they would be side by side with us the whole time. And that was just huge because there was a lot more clarity and the project would flow faster.
You know, maybe one thing, you said something, sorry for totally capturing your meeting.
Take over.
But
Collaboration.
Is that the VAs are working with the devs. Maybe you need to look at it differently and have the devs work with the VAs instead of, so you can get that lead time. Say, we need that lead time and the devs need to work with us as opposed to working during the cycle and have them like coding at the same time you're writing the stories.
It's also amazing some of the questions you'll get from the developers. I was working with a bank in Toronto, and a team that was struggling, and the product owner, they were rewriting some ATM software, cash machine software. And the product owner was like, well, we need to make sure the user experience is secure. And one of the developers said, physically secure or data secure? And there was kind of a quiet that went around the room because everybody in their mind was just thinking about data security. Nobody had contemplated the concept of physical security. Should we put the new ATMs in some sort of kiosk or someplace, where you see in some bigger cities, sort of a thing. It totally wasn't the security, but it was good to have those side conversations, those other bits and pieces of, well, what do you mean by that? Especially when words have different meanings. I think there's a hand up.
Yeah, just to try and contribute to this conversation further. At my previous job, requirements gathering, requirements documentation was done with the business analyst, this is me, the developer, the person who was the manager for that platform, and myself as QA tester. And it was an insight for myself into requirements gathering. A lot of the developers who were doing the actual coding were not on site and weren't in the building, so it was an insight for them, from me, and from the business owner and the platform manager in terms of what the context was for what we were asking for. Because sometimes they'd have a completely different idea than what we in the building from context, because the business analyst and the SME were like 4 rows down, so I could just ask them. But when the developers are in another city, that was really tough to do. So it was insight for them into the process, so that it helped guide my test plan writing, and it also helped guide their development, so that when it got to my testing, I wouldn't have to go, oh my God, this is totally not what the business analyst was looking for, because I'd been in the business before I got into QA testing. So especially with this company where I'd worked in the business, I had a decent idea. So it was an insight for developers as much as it was for...
Well, that's equally bad too, right? If you have domain knowledge, and there's gaps, and you just kind of start filling in the gaps with what you think or how you would do it.
But the flip side was with developers who were sort of removed from some of the context. Sometimes those questions got asked, and sometimes they were really important to ask. Because it made myself and the business analysts think about it more in terms of how to put it and what we need to identify as points of concern.
I've never seen a product get worse involving developers in earlier conversations. I've seen it get worse with more management, but I've never seen it get worse with more developers.
That process isn't something that's done at my current job, and so I don't come into it until the requirements have already been developed and the requirements have already been agreed on, and it comes into the sprint for development, and I miss it because...
And you get 2 weeks to test.
Right, but it was an insight. My last job was waterfall, so different time frame. But it was an insight at a really different point into the whole process of what it looked like, especially at a point when I was still learning QA and IT. It was very valuable for me.
You had a question.
Yeah. If you're working on multiple projects and if you're involving everybody in all these discussions, like there will be another argument that we are spending more time in meetings rather than doing the actual work. So what would be the solution there?
Stop doing so many projects.
which we cannot control, right? Because
Yes and no. I mean, you've got to work with management to understand that the multitasking never works. So having your teams work on 20 projects but finishing 2, what's the point of that if you can work on fewer projects and get more out?
right now we are working on like 7 to 8 projects and we are delivering it on time. Those are very small projects. I'm not saying like this, those are big projects, but at the same time we involve with multiple downs.
It's still multitasking, and it still takes away some of the things that I've done. I've sat management down and focusing on key personnel, so maybe an architect or something where we have very few of those particular roles, and just mapped it out. Oh, John's working on 7 projects. Let's just say he's fully utilized for 40 hours, which we know he's not, but for giggles, we'll just say that. Divide 40 hours by 7. So, what's that, like a little less than 6 hours per project per week? How effective is he going to be in getting anything done just at that level? And then you could throw another level on top and like, what's your name? Tracy. Tracy's got him booked for 40 hours next week, and Bill's got him booked for 20 hours next week, and Lisa's got him booked for 15 hours next week. How the hell is he going to get all that done? And you just have to, you probably have to have that conversation a lot. Another good one is go Google the 405 Expressway and just show them a picture of that.
Where is that?
That is in LA, and that is a fully utilized expressway, and no one moves. 405. Yeah. Just Google the 405 Expressway, and you'll see all kinds of horrific pictures of the traffic jams.
That kind of goes into my question. I don't know, did you have more? I'm
No.
sorry, okay. One of the biggest challenges I have working in the firm that I do is that more than half of the applications that we have are waterfall. The other half, you're Chase, right?
Yeah.
And Agile. Then the other half is an Agile. And I would say a lot of our core applications are waterfall. Core. And that makes it so challenging. Specifically with building project plans, right? Because when you think about delivery and everything that's involved in a sprint and how they're going to do the handoff to an application that does waterfall, and then then they have to go through their time frames, and it's virtually impossible. And I think of the 405?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's especially when you're working on larger programs.
It's
What do you have? Do you have any suggestions?
That's why consultants exist, and that's probably why you have a different Agile coach every 6 months, I would guess. So when you hear that a good Agile transformation has to come from the top down, that's one of the reasons why. There has to be an appetite at that level to say we are going to fundamentally change. But then they're not fundamentally changing what you're doing, right? I mean, so we talked about SAFe a little while ago. One of the things about SAFe that I think is really good for an organization that size, if management does it, is to go to that portfolio layer, or whatever it's called, that very top layer, to implement Lean. We're going to basically take all of the business initiatives, we're going to throw them on a big Kanban board. People who have the title and the status to say that, and here's probably, I'm sorry, what's your name back here in the corner? Radhika. The problem your company's facing is somebody's got to say, this is the most important thing we're working on. This is the next most important thing. You can't have 40 things that are all the most important thing we're working on.
Oh my God.
You can't.
That's like cleaning out 4 closets in your house at once.
Well, no, here's the example that I use. Actually, I had a guy almost fight me in DC over this. But Tracy, how do you clean your house?
I start in the kitchen,
And I work what I call the circle because that's the way it works.
So do
Then I
you?
vacuum the steps and then I go upstairs.
So do you put 2 dishes in the dishwasher, and then go clean half of your toilet, and then go put 2 things in the washing machine, and then go wipe half of the other bathroom sink down, and then go vacuum a 6-foot section of carpet? Is that how you clean your house? That's what Radhika's company's doing, right? They're trying to clean their house that way, pieces and parts, and you work for 8 hours, you're exhausted, and you've got nothing accomplished. Right. So it can't be lip service. We're agile now, and then we're not going to fundamentally change. You have to fundamentally change. And that has to come from the top down. Or it comes from the bottom up, and you just say, the heck with it, we're all going to do it this way, and try and stop us. But you can't always get everyone at the bottom to rebel and say, we're doing it this way. Especially in a company that size. I mean, you guys have like addresses and zip codes just to get to a cube, right? Like that's a tough.
Yeah. Right. And they do the way that we have the enterprise here, and they do those coordinated releases which are quarterly.
Yeah.
And all of those coordinated releases also encompass those applications that are waterfall.
Yeah.
They would just step away from it. I mean, they talk about it as if it's a great thing, and they say, we ran Agile, we would have constant upgrades on every single month.
Look, you gotta wanna. You gotta wanna. And then when you have conversations with those individuals, you're like, Amazon's pushing 20,000 builds a day. They look at you like, that's impossible. No, if you want to do it, you can get there. I think you had a question.
So I'm thinking at the Scrum level and the concept of vision and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
How important is it at that level for a team that's either on a 2-week cycle or a 4-week cycle for them to be able to know what the vision statement is?
Ken takes it a layer deeper, doesn't he? Sprint goals. Decomposing your vision into what's the goal for this sprint or release if you do it.
I asked the question because I observed a Scrum session, and the Scrum Master asked, "What's our vision for this?" And there was crickets.
Okay.
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, no. If you're doing Scrum by the book, and for those who came in the early days of Path to Agility when Ken was here every year, if you're not doing it my way, you're not doing it right. Who've heard him give that speech? Every sprint has a goal. If you're doing releases, every release has a goal. So the vision is still there. And that should be coming from the product owner, right? It's good the Scrum Master is asking that. I would expect the Scrum Master, unless they were doing it intentionally with the product owner in the room, and I'm trying to put them on the spot, but I would expect the Scrum Master to know, or hopefully know. But yeah, if you've got an absent PO, then that could not be awesome. Anything else? Hey, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
This was so awesome.
Thank you.
Really good, thanks.
Does anybody know, are you doing speaker feedback? Is there a way to do that? Does anybody know?
Give it to you. Thumbs up.
It's what?
Survey Monkey, but I don't know what the.
Survey Monkey?
Yes.
Yeah, but I.
Yeah, there's
Find some survey
I want you
stuff.
to put my name on one of your slides.
Okay.
It's this quote.
Okay. Thanks for coming, guys.